April 7, 1943, dawn breaks over the Solomon Islands. The humid air above the jungle shimmers like glass as 6 Japanese A6M Zero fighters rise into the pale light. Their engines purr with the precision of katana blades drawn from a sheath. Below, on the horizon near Guadalcanal, a new shape climbs sluggishly through the haze, broad-shouldered, round-nosed, and slow. To the Japanese eyes in their slender, elegant cockpits, the American machine looks comical. Lieutenant Saburo Nishizawa tilts his head, watching the sunlight glint off its oversized cowl. "A flying oil drum!" He laughs over the radio, and the others join him. The island's stillness is shattered by the sound of ridicule and roaring engines. The Zeros begin to dive, thin wings slicing through cloud vapor. They have dominated these skies for over a year. Nothing so far has outturned or outclimbed them. The men of the Imperial Navy consider themselves heirs to a warrior code that prizes grace, not brute force. To them, this new Republic P-47 Thunderbolt is an insult, a machine that knows nothing of elegance. They expect it to crumble before their disciplined precision. As the first bursts of gunfire flare, the Americans realize how quickly the enemy moves. Lieutenant William Dunham, flying one of the new Thunderbolts, can barely keep the Zero in sight. "They were everywhere," he later writes, "like mosquitoes around a lantern." A tracer line flashes past his canopy. The Zero closes from above, its pilot certain of another easy kill. He squeezes the trigger bullets, hammer the Thunderbolt's tail section, but the heavy aircraft keeps flying. Then Dunham does something unexpected. He pushes the stick forward and dives straight down. For a heartbeat, the Japanese pilot hesitates. Chasing a dive has always meant advantage for the Zero. He follows, but within seconds his control stick stiffens. The airframe trembles. The Zero's fragile skin cannot bear the pressure of 450 miles per hour. The P-47, built around a monstrous Pratt Whitney R-2800 engine and wrapped in armor, plunges faster and faster. Dunham's vision blurs from the G-force, but the engine howls in triumph. When he finally levels out near sea level, the pursuing Zero is gone, its pilot forced to pull up before his wings tear apart. High above, Nishizawa curses. He has seen the impossible, an enemy too slow to climb, yet too strong to kill. The radio, moments ago full of laughter, now carries uneasy silence. What the Japanese do not yet know is that this clumsy beast can reach dive speeds above 500 mph, nearly 150 faster than the Zero's limit. In those few seconds of descent, the Thunderbolt reveals its secret. Its weight, once mocked, is its weapon. Down on the American airstrip at Henderson Field, pilots stand by the crude map boards, tracing lines of enemy contact. Many of them arrived only days earlier, still skeptical of their new fighter. "She looks like a milk jug with wings," one sergeant jokes, giving the P-47 its nickname, the Jug. But behind the humor lies doubt. The aircraft is massive, over 10 tons loaded, and its cockpit sits high like a pillbox turret. Pilots worry that in a turning fight, it will be slaughtered. They do not yet understand that war in the Pacific has changed. Survival will depend not on turning tighter, but on hitting harder and diving faster. Above the Solomons, that truth is being written in smoke trails. American ground crews watch through binoculars as black specks twist against the morning sky. A Zero bursts into flames, spiraling toward the sea. Moments later, a Thunderbolt limps back to base, riddled with holes yet still flying. The crew chief runs his hand along the fuselage, counting 27 punctures without a single one reaching the pilot. Armor plating an inch thick has done its work. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the Americans have an airplane that can take punishment and return it with fury. At Rabaul, the Japanese command receives the first reports. Pilots describe a giant enemy plane that will not burn. One even claims his bullets bounced off like pebbles on steel. The officers dismiss it as exaggeration. The Zero has been victorious everywhere. Why should today be different? Yet in private, some engineers already worry. The A6M's great strength, its featherweight design, is also its weakness. To achieve its legendary agility, the Zero carries no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. In prolonged battle against these new armored foes, its advantage could vanish. By midday, Wreckage floats on the turquoise water between Bougainville and Kolombangara. Oil slicks shimmer like black mirrors in the sun. The men who return to base speak with new caution. Lieutenant Nishizawa, normally brash, writes in his log, "The enemy machine dives like thunder and rises again. We cannot follow." For him, it is not yet defeat, but doubt, the first fracture in confidence that once seemed unbreakable. On the American side, the discovery feels electric. The heavy Thunderbolt, once ridiculed by its own pilots, begins to earn respect. Flight leader Robert Johnson recalls his first engagement. "They hit me with everything they had. I brought her home on a wing and a prayer, but she got me home." The myth of invincible Japanese pilots starts to waver. Each encounter proves that skill alone cannot outmatch power and protection. The psychological shift is immediate and profound. Until now, Japanese aviators have seen the Americans as clumsy and fearful, their machines inferior imitations. The Zero's victories from China to the Philippines have reinforced that belief. But over the Solomon Islands, they face something new, an enemy willing to absorb damage, to dive into danger rather than dance around it. Laughter turns to radio silence, arrogance to calculation. The laughter that opened the day becomes the echo of its end. As evening settles over the island, the last returning Zero lands at Balali Airfield. Its mechanic counts the bullet holes in silence. The pilot removes his gloves and stares at the distant clouds, where the sun sets crimson behind the wreckage of two comrades. The tropical air smells of salt and burnt metal. For the first time since the war began, he feels a question he cannot voice. What if our invincible wings are not enough? At Henderson Field, technicians refuel the battered Thunderbolts. Their radial engines tick as they cool, radiating heat like iron stoves. Pilots lean against the fuselage, smoking in the fading light. Someone mentions that the Japanese called them flying tanks. The men grin. The insult feels like a compliment now. The P-47 has survived its baptism, and tomorrow it will return to the sky heavier still with confidence. Night falls across the Solomons. In the dark, the jungle hums with cicadas and the distant throb of generators. Both sides prepare for another day, unaware that this small encounter marks the beginning of a shift that will reshape the Pacific Air War. The Zero's reign of elegance is meeting the age of brute power. The storm has only begun to form on the horizon, and when it breaks, it will change everything about what it means to rule the sky. The legend begins not in the chaos of war, but in a quiet Tokyo design room in 1937. Drafting tables line the walls. Cigarette smoke curls above blueprints pinned beneath paperweights. A young engineer named Jiro Horikoshi, barely 32, leans over a sheet of tracing paper. On it lies the outline of something that defies convention, a fighter so light it could dance through the clouds. The Imperial Japanese Navy has given him an impossible demand. Build a carrier-based plane that can outrun, outclimb, and outfight any opponent, yet travel more than 1,800 miles without refueling. Every gram matters. Every bolt, every panel must serve the singular purpose of speed. Horikoshi's team strips away anything unnecessary. Armor plating is rejected. Self-sealing fuel tanks, considered vital elsewhere, are dismissed as dead weight. The aircraft will be a blade, not a shield. By 1939, the prototype, designated A6M Zero, takes to the air at the Navy's testing ground in Kisarazu. It rises effortlessly, climbing at 3,000 feet per minute. Watching officers fall silent. The plane circles once, twice, then vanishes into the sky like a ghost. The Zero is born not just a machine, but a statement of national philosophy. Purity through perfection, victory through precision. When the Sino-Japanese War expands in 1940, the new fighter is sent to the skies over China. Captain Masatake Okumiya commands one of the first units equipped with the Zero. Over Chongqing, he dives upon Soviet-supplied I-16s. The Chinese pilots never see him coming. In 2 weeks, the unit claims more than 50 kills without a single loss. Reports reach Tokyo describing the Zero as unassailable. Newspapers publish sketches of its long, elegant wings, calling it the guardian of Asia's skies. For Japan's public, Weary of endless campaigns, the Zero becomes a symbol of technological destiny, proof that their island nation can match, even surpass the West. On December 7, 1941, that symbol explodes into global consciousness. At 7:48 a.m. over Pearl Harbor, Zeros of the 1st Air Fleet streak out of the dawn. They bank low over Ford Island, their 20mm cannons flashing in the sunlight. American sailors on the decks of the Arizona and West Virginia look up, confused. The attacking planes seem impossibly agile. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Itaya leads the first wave, shouting through his mask, "Totsugeki! Attack!" Within 90 minutes, the U.S. Pacific Fleet lies crippled, and the world learns a new name whispered with awe: Zero. In the following months, the aircraft carves its legend across the map. Over the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies, it dominates the sky. Allied pilots flying Brewster Buffaloes and Curtiss P-40s are stunned by its maneuverability. Dogfights that once ended in stalemates now become massacres. Australian pilot Clive Caldwell later recalled, "You turned, and it was already behind you." To fight a Zero was to fight the impossible. Its roll rate surpassed 140 degrees per second. Its turning circle barely half that of most Western fighters. It could hang in the air like a hawk, pivot, and strike again before the enemy even completed a loop. Behind this performance lies engineering genius mixed with dangerous compromise. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai 12 engine produces only 940 horsepower, modest by Western standards, but its featherweight airframe compensates. At full load, it weighs just over 5,000 pounds. A Zero can climb from sea level to 10,000 feet in under 4 minutes, and with external tanks it can escort bombers 1,600 miles, ranges Allied planners once thought impossible. To Horikoshi, every successful mission validates his philosophy. Yet he knows each victory hides a flaw. A single incendiary round in its unprotected fuel tank can ignite the entire fuselage. For the pilots, these dangers hardly matter. They are heirs of the Bushido Code, the spirit of the samurai reborn in aluminum and oil. Training manuals quote the Hagakure: "The way of the warrior is found in death." At Tsukuba Naval Air Base, young cadets bow before portraits of fallen aces. Instructors tell them that armor breeds cowardice. Only faith in skill ensures immortality. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, who will become one of Japan's most celebrated aces, remembers his first combat mission. "We were told the Zero is our sword and our soul. To lose was to shame the emperor." This ideology fuses perfectly with the aircraft's design, both fragile and fearless. Through 1942, victories continue unabated. In the Battle of the Coral Sea, Zeros shield Japanese carriers with surgical precision. One pilot, Kiyoshi Ito, downs 3 Wildcats in a single sortie. In Java, Allied defenses collapse within weeks. Over the Indian Ocean, Zeros ravage British squadrons. Observers compare their grace to dragonflies dancing over flames. The myth grows faster than facts can contain it. Even American intelligence files admit grudgingly, enemy fighter possesses superior agility and climb. Pilots begin to fear the silhouette of its rounded wingtips against the sun, the last shape many ever see. At home, the Zero becomes a national icon. Children fold paper models of it in classrooms. Newsreels show pilots smiling beside their pristine aircraft, cherry blossoms fluttering around them. Horikoshi watches one of these reels from his Tokyo office and feels a quiet unease. The engineers know production shortcuts are spreading: thinner aluminum, fewer quality inspections, but the nation demands quantity, not caution. By late 1942, factories in Nagoya produce hundreds each month. Each one is a promise that Japan's sky supremacy will last forever. But history moves faster than ideology. In the United States, engineers study fragments of downed Zeros recovered from the Aleutians and from crash sites in the Philippines. They learn its secrets, its strengths, and its fatal weakness. Reports circulate among Allied design bureaus. Light structure, poor in dives, minimal protection. In response, American factories begin building the opposite philosophy: thick armor, massive engines, survivability over elegance. The stage is quietly set for a technological duel between two extremes of design. Still, in 1942, no such threat is visible to the men flying for Japan. Lieutenant Toshio Okta, based at WWII, writes to his wife, "The new American planes burn like paper. When we return, they call us gods." His letter, preserved in a museum today, captures the confidence that fills every cockpit. They believe the Zero is invincible, a divine wind reincarnated. That faith fuels them through exhaustion, hunger, and tropical disease. The roar of the Sockeye engine becomes their prayer. Yet even within their triumphs, small warnings appear. After long missions, pilots notice fatigue cracks around wing roots. Fuel lines leak under high stress. Mechanics complain of shortages. Still, orders remain absolute. Push farther, fight longer. The aircraft's perfection is treated as eternal truth, not something that can be improved or questioned. In that illusion of permanence lies the seed of downfall. When 1943 dawns, the Zero has logged over 2 years of dominance. Its kill ratio against Allied aircraft remains staggering. Some units claim 12 victories for every loss. Newspapers still call it the spirit of the empire. But across the ocean, another spirit is stirring. American designers have built machines that embrace the very qualities the Zero rejected: weight, power, and armor. One of them, a monster wrapped around a 2,000 horsepower engine, is about to enter the stage. As the sun sets over Rabaul one evening, Horikoshi stands beside a runway watching his creation lift off in formation. The orange light catches on the polished skin of each aircraft as it climbs into the clouds. Pride swells in his chest, but so does dread. "We built a sword," he murmurs to an assistant, "but the enemy may be building a hammer." The wind from the departing Zeros stirs the dust around his shoes. Somewhere beyond the horizon, that hammer, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, is already taking shape. The laughter heard a year later over the Solomon Islands, when Japanese pilots mock the bulky newcomer, is not born from arrogance alone. It comes from memory from the days when their light, perfect fighters ruled unchallenged, when the Zero's wings seemed touched by divinity. They do not yet know that every myth has an ending written into its first triumph. The winter of 1940 in Farmingdale, New York, is bitter and gray. Inside the cluttered design office of Republic Aviation, Alexander Kartveli leans over a drawing board littered with crumpled blueprints. Outside, snow rattles against the hangar doors. The war in Europe is raging, and reports from Britain describe dogfights between Spitfires and Messerschmitts, sleek, fast, deadly. America is still months away from entering the war, but the U.S. Army Air Corps has already sent its demand. Build a fighter that can climb faster, dive harder, and fly higher than anything before. Kartveli, a Georgian-born engineer who fled Soviet repression years earlier, stares at the specifications and shakes his head. "They want a miracle," he mutters in his thick accent. "So we will build one." At that moment, the United States lacks a frontline fighter to rival the Axis powers. The P-40 Warhawk, though rugged, is sluggish above 15,000 feet. The Army wants altitude a fighter that can escort bombers into the stratosphere, where thinner air grants safety. Kartveli's first sketches reveal an aircraft almost comical in proportion. A giant radial engine dominating the nose, a cockpit perched high like a watchtower, and a fuselage swollen to house an experimental turbo-supercharger system. When his engineers protest that it looks too heavy, he slaps the drawing table and replies, "Power first, grace later." The engine he chooses is Pratt & Whitney's R-2800 Double Wasp, a 2-row, 18-cylinder monster capable of over 2,000 horsepower. No fighter has ever carried such a beast before. But the real secret lies behind it, a General Electric turbo supercharger mounted in the rear fuselage, fed by a maze of ducts and intercoolers. The setup adds weight but allows the engine to maintain full power even at 30,000 feet. In essence, Kartveli is building a machine that breathes strength where others gasp for air. The project receives the code name XP-47B. When the prototype rolls out in May 1941, it looks absurd beside the slim P-40s parked nearby. Mechanics nickname it Kartveli's milk bottle. On its first taxi test, the tail wheel barely lifts. The massive propeller chops through the air with a thunderous bellow. Test pilot Lowell Bales climbs into the cockpit, which sits so high he can see over the hangar roof. He throttles up the plane, lurches forward, trembling with energy. The roar of the R-2800 shakes the tarmac. At 140 mph, the aircraft lifts, heavy but steady. Within minutes, it climbs to 25,000 feet, still accelerating. When Bales lands, he grins through the cockpit glass. "She's no dancer," he says, "but God help anything she catches." Production approval comes swiftly, though not without skepticism. Pilots at training bases take one look at the P-47 Thunderbolt and groan. At 10,000 pounds empty, it's nearly twice the weight of a Spitfire. The cockpit is cramped, the takeoff roll terrifyingly long. Many call it the jug, short for juggernaut, or sometimes milk jug. Ground crews curse its maintenance complexity. The turbo system requires delicate tuning. Its exhaust ducts snake like intestines beneath the fuselage. But Kartveli remains unmoved. "They will learn," he tells a colonel during an inspection. "It is not a toy, it is a weapon." When America finally enters the war after Pearl Harbor, Thunderbolts begin pouring out of Republic's factories. By early 1943, the first combat groups deploy to England and the Pacific. One of the early pilots, Francis Gabby Gabreski, remembers his initial doubts. "We thought she was too big for a fighter. Then we opened the throttle." The moment the R-2800 hits full power, the aircraft transforms. The acceleration pins the pilot to his seat. In dives, the airframe remains stable long after other fighters would start to shake apart. Pilots soon realize they can use this brute strength tactically. Hit hard, dive away, and climb back before the enemy can respond, a style later known as boom and zoom. Technically, the P-47 is an engineer's paradox. Its fuselage, built from 13,000 rivets and heavy aluminum panels, gives it exceptional durability. It carries 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, capable of spitting 7,200 rounds per minute. A short burst can shred a bomber or a Zero alike. Beneath the skin, a self-sealing fuel system and armor plating protect the pilot and engine from fire. Fully loaded, the aircraft can carry half a ton of ammunition and fuel, enough for 800 miles of combat radius. Every design choice, from the thick wings to the bulletproof glass, prioritizes survival. Early missions, however, are anything but smooth. The Thunderbolt's climb rate is poor, below 10,000 feet. Its range is limited without auxiliary tanks. Pilots accustomed to nimble aircraft complain of sluggish controls. In a dogfight, they say, "The jug feels like a bus." In one training accident, a rookie misjudges takeoff speed, slams into a tree, and walks away stunned but alive. The aircraft burns, but he survives unscathed. Word spreads quickly. This plane might not be graceful, but it keeps you breathing. As production accelerates, Republic's plant becomes a marvel of wartime industry. By mid-1943, over 1,000 Thunderbolts roll off assembly lines each month. Women riveters in coveralls stand on scaffolds, sealing the metal hide of the giant beasts. Each engine requires 2 days of hand fitting. The propellers are as tall as a man. In nearby cafeterias, engineers trade stories of their metal monsters flying through European storms. The U.S. military finally sees what Kartveli promised: a machine that can fight in any weather, at any altitude. Among the early combat heroes is Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group. On June 26, 1943, over France, Johnson's P-47 is attacked by an FW-190. Cannon shells smash into his fuselage, setting the cockpit ablaze. He dives to escape, smoke filling his lungs. The canopy jams. Bullets continue to strike, shattering instruments. Yet the Thunderbolt keeps flying. He finally forces the fire out by diving at 500 mph and lands safely in England. Counting later, his crew finds 21 holes, 2 in the propeller, and 1 round lodged in his armor plate inches from his spine. Johnson writes in his report, "I owe my life to this brute of steel." From that day, the Thunderbolt's reputation changes forever. The Thunderbolt's greatest strength lies not in finesse, but resilience. In the Pacific, Its rugged design allows it to survive hits from Japanese 7.7mm rounds that would incinerate lighter planes. American pilots begin to trust it the way samurai trusted their armor. Gabreski later says, "When I strapped into the Jug, I knew I could come home." It becomes not only a tool of destruction, but a symbol of American industrial philosophy power through protection. Engineers continue to refine the model. The P-47D variant adds more range, better canopy visibility, and improved dive brakes. In testing, it reaches 508 miles per hour in a power dive, faster than any Allied fighter before it. The turbo supercharger, once mocked for its complexity, proves its worth over and over, delivering full thrust above 30,000 feet, where Japanese engines wheeze thin. The Thunderbolt, once grounded by skepticism, now soars over continents. Yet admiration grows slowly. Many pilots transferring from the nimble P-51 Mustang still grumble. The Jug feels unromantic, like a tank with wings. But when missions turn deadly, escorting bombers over Berlin or dueling Zeros above New Guinea, those same pilots return alive while lighter planes vanish. Statistics tell the truth. The P-47 can take more damage than any fighter in the war and still fly home. Maintenance crews begin etching small Thunderbolts under cockpits for every mission survived. Soon, the symbol becomes a badge of pride. In 1943, as Japanese Zeros continue to dominate the Pacific Islands, the first squadrons of Thunderbolts arrive. They are ungainly on coral airstrips, their engines deafening in the humid heat. Mechanics wrap towels around their heads to block the noise. The Japanese pilots laugh when they first see them massive gray beasts sitting awkwardly under palm trees. They call them flying elephants. But the laughter will not last long. Beneath those broad wings hums the 2,000 horsepower heart that will soon turn mockery into fear. The P-47's debut is not just the arrival of a new fighter. It marks a philosophical turning point. Where the Zero chased purity and agility, the Thunderbolt embodies endurance and brute strength. One relies on grace, the other on raw engineering. The Pacific skies are about to become a proving ground for these opposing ideals. At Republic's hangar, Alexander Kartveli stands beneath the roar of another test flight. The air smells of fuel and hot metal. As the silver machine climbs into the clouds, he lights a cigarette and smiles. "Let them laugh," he says quietly. The thunder always follows the lightning. And across the ocean, in the islands of the Pacific, that thunder is already beginning to roll. The Pacific sky in mid-1943 is a sheet of burning blue. Over the jungles of New Guinea, steam rises from the mountains like smoke from a smoldering forge. Down below, mud-clogged runways shimmer under the sun as ground crews at WWII airfield roll out a new line of P-47 Thunderbolts. Each one bears the black and white checkerboard of the 348th Fighter Group, led by Colonel Neil Kirby, a quiet Texan with eyes that never seem to blink. The air smells of oil, sweat, and palm dust. Men work silently. The war is moving closer by the hour. At the same time, 200 miles north at Rabaul, the Japanese 204th Air Group readies its Zeros. Lieutenant Saburo Nishizawa, the same pilot who once laughed at the Thunderbolt's bulk over the Solomons, adjusts his flight gloves and listens to the radio briefing. Reports claim that American Jug fighters have been spotted escorting bombers near Leh. He frowns. "Jugs," he repeats, tasting the word. The officers smirk. "They fall like stones," one says. Nishizawa nods but does not laugh this time. He remembers the dive he could not follow months earlier. The morning begins with a low thunder. Dozens of American B-25 bombers form up over the Owen Stanley Range, silver specks against the clouds. Below them, Kirby and his men climb through the haze. The Thunderbolt engines howl, each Pratt Whitney R-2800 straining for altitude. The aircraft are heavy, nearly 11,000 pounds each. But the pilots know the secret now. Once the Jug reaches 25,000 feet, the air belongs to them. From the east, the Zeros appear pale green, glinting in the sunlight like dragonflies. They rise fast, spiraling upward to meet the bombers. "Enemy bandits, 12 o'clock high," radios Major Dick Bong, one of America's rising aces. The air explodes in a ballet of contrails and tracers. Zeros slash into the formation, their cannons hammering at the bombers. The P-47s roll to intercept, and for the first time, the Japanese pilots realize these brutes can fight back on their own terms. Colonel Kirby leads the attack. Diving from 28,000 feet, he throttles forward until the world becomes a blur. The airframe screams. His altimeter needle spins like a compass in a storm. Beneath him, a Zero twists to escape, its wings shivering at 420 plateaus, the edge of structural failure. Kirby's guns light up. 850 caliber streams converge, slicing through the thin aluminum skin of the Zero. The Japanese aircraft disintegrates mid-turn, leaving a spiral of smoke. Kirby pulls out at 500 mph, the P-47 shaking but intact. Over the radio he calls, calm and almost detached, "One down." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, flying a Thunderbolt named Half Pint, finds himself alone. 5 Zeros swarm his tail in a tight circle. He jerks the control stick. The plane refuses to roll quickly enough. The Zeros close in, cannon shells ripping into his fuselage. The canopy fills with smoke and glass shards. Johnson feels a burning line across his shoulder. He dives, shoving the throttle to the stop. The turbocharger shrieks as the P-47 surges downward. The altimeter plummets 15,000, 10,000, 5,000 feet. The pursuing Zeros hesitate. Their wings begin to tremble. One pulls out, another breaks formation. Johnson keeps descending, almost vertical, until the sky becomes a rushing green blur. Then at the last second he yanks back. The G-forces crush him into the seat, but the jug holds. The Zeros are gone. When Johnson lands, the ground crew stares in disbelief. His plane looks as if it's been through an artillery barrage over 200 bullet holes, one tire blown, tail shredded. Yet it sits upright on the strip, engine still idling. Johnson climbs out, pale but alive. "She's ugly," he says, patting the fuselage, "but she's bulletproof." Word spreads through every squadron that day. The jug can take what no other plane can. Across the front, the pattern repeats. Zeros dive gracefully, roll sharply, and for a few turns seem invincible. But when the Thunderbolts dive away, the Japanese cannot follow. The A6M's thin wings twist. Its light frame threatens to tear apart. The once unquestioned agility becomes a curse. American pilots learn a new rhythm strike: dive, climb, repeat. Boom and zoom, they call it, a tactic born from the jug's strength. In contrast, Japanese pilots cling to their old creed of turn-and-circle combat. Their commanders still preach the supremacy of skill over machinery. But in New Guinea's harsh skies, skill cannot stop bullets that pass clean through steel armor. "They do not burn," one Zero pilot writes in his diary. "We hit them again and again, yet they rise from the jungle like demons." The psychological shift is palpable. Radio intercepts record Japanese voices shouting, "Atsui! Atsui! They are too hot," whenever Thunderbolts enter the battle. Confidence gives way to tension. The once fluid radio chatter now carries sharp edges of fear. By early 1944, the Americans push deeper into the archipelago. Thunderbolts escort bombers over Wewak and Hollandia, pounding supply lines and airfields. Their engines echo over the mountains like rolling drums. Pilots who once feared dogfights now relish them. Gabby Gabreski, in one mission, dives into a formation of Zeros, shooting down 3 in 30 seconds. "They turned beautifully," he later said. "But turning doesn't save you when I'm faster in every other direction." For the Japanese, attrition becomes unbearable. Every lost pilot is irreplaceable. Every downed Zero a blow to morale. Replacement pilots arrive with barely 100 flight hours. The veteran aces Nishizawa, Sakai, Ota carry the burden of an entire air force. Their planes still gleam, but their eyes have dulled. Even victories feel empty. The enemy's machines keep coming, heavier, louder, endless. One afternoon in February 1944, Nishizawa leads a sortie against Allied bombers near Wewak. The sky is thick with contrails. His unit dives into a swarm of Thunderbolts. The first burst shreds his wingman's tail. Another Zero explodes beside him. He breaks left, pulling into a climb, but a P-47 rises beneath him, guns blazing. Bullets tear across his fuselage. Smoke fills the cockpit. He tries to eject the canopy, but the handle jams. The last thing he sees is the jungle spinning below, green and merciless. The myth that began over Pearl Harbor ends in that spiral of fire. Back at WWII, the surviving American pilots celebrate quietly. They know the balance has shifted. The P-47, once mocked as a lumbering brute, now dominates every sky it enters. "You can hear them before you see them," says one Australian ground observer. "A roar like thunder, and then the sky clears." The technical contrast between the two planes tells the story of the war itself. The Zero's empty weight of barely 5,000 pounds had once been its miracle. Now it's its death sentence. The P-47, nearly twice as heavy, dives safely beyond 500 km. In the chaos of modern air combat, speed and survivability outweigh finesse. What was once poetry in flight becomes vulnerability. By mid-1944, the Japanese High Command concedes that the A6M cannot match American fighters in performance. Production shifts toward newer designs, but shortages cripple the effort. The Zero, once the pride of Japan, now fills secondary roles: trainer, interceptor, suicide craft. Its pilots, once seen as gods, now face impossible odds. As the campaign closes, Kirby's 348th Group returns to base after another grueling mission. The airstrip glows orange with sunset. Mechanics walk among the hulks of battered jugs, patching holes, wiping soot. Kirby steps from his cockpit, his flight suit soaked in sweat. Someone offers him a cigarette. He takes it, staring at the sky where streaks of contrails fade into dusk. "They had the beauty," he says quietly, "but we had the thunder." In that single sentence lies the turning of the Pacific Air War, the moment when grace gave way to force, and the sky itself bowed to power. The laughter that once echoed across the radios over the Solomons is gone now, replaced by static and silence. The Zero's legend, once untouchable, has met its reckoning in the roaring heart of the P-47 Thunderbolt. And as the final light bleeds over the New Guinea horizon, the jungle below trembles under the fading rumble of engines. The sound of one empire falling, and another rising in steel. The war ends not with a dogfight, but with silence. By August 1945, the skies of the Pacific, once alive with the snarl of engines and tracer fire, lie empty. Over Japan's shattered airfields, the remains of Zeros sit in neat rows, wings buckled, paint blistered by sun and shrapnel. Their shadows stretch long across the tarmac, as if clinging to what once was. In Okinawa, the wind whistles through bullet holes in a broken fuselage, carrying echoes of the voices that once laughed, fought, and vanished among the clouds. Half a world away, in a hangar in Farmingdale, New York, a Republic Aviation engineer wipes his hands on a rag and stares at the last Thunderbolt coming off the production line. The war that built it is over. The factory, once roaring with 20,000 workers, falls quiet. The P-47, the brute born of necessity, now rests beneath the flicker of fluorescent light, a machine that carried thousands of young men home from fire and steel. The engineer whispers, "You did your job," and turns out the light. The P-47 Thunderbolt becomes one of the most respected aircraft in aviation history. Over Europe and the Pacific combined, it flies more than 745,000 sorties, destroying 86,000 enemy vehicles and 6,000 aircraft. Its survival rate surpasses every Allied fighter of the war. In the Pacific, pilots who once doubted its worth come to see it as more than a tool of war. It is a fortress with wings. When the aircrews write home, they call it the jug that never quits. Meanwhile, in post-war Japan, the surviving Mitsubishi Zeros are quietly dismantled under Allied supervision. To the Japanese, the sight is heartbreaking. For years, the Zero had been more than a fighter. It was a symbol of identity, of courage wrapped in aluminum. The country's newspapers had called it the Sword of the Emperor. Now that sword lies broken. Designer Jiro Horikoshi, who once dreamt of crafting the perfect aircraft, watches one of his creations being cut apart in a scrapyard outside Nagoya. He removes his hat and bows. It was never meant for suicide. he says softly. Only for flight. In the years that follow, both nations rebuild not just their economies, but their memories. The Americans enshrine the Thunderbolt in museums and stories of industrial triumph. Its massive engine, the Pratt Whitney R-2800, becomes a symbol of what happens when engineering is given the freedom to solve problems through brute innovation. Veterans describe it as a beast that cared for its pilot. At airfields in the U.S., the rumble of restored P-47s becomes a sound of nostalgia, deep, rolling, confident. Japan's relationship with the Zero is more complicated. For many, it embodies both pride and tragedy. Pilots like Saburo Sakai, one of the few aces to survive the war, tour the country giving lectures. "The Zero was our youth," he tells one audience in 1955. "Beautiful, fast, and doomed." He insists it was never inferior, only trapped by a nation that refused to change. When American test pilots later evaluate captured Zeros, they agree. At low speeds and altitudes, it remains a marvel of design. But war evolved faster than beauty could follow. By the 1960s, aviation historians begin to see these two aircraft as philosophical opposites, a mirror of the nations that built them. The Zero, all grace and purity, built for agility and sacrifice. The Thunderbolt, all power and survival, built for endurance and return. One sought perfection in the art of flight, the other, perfection in resilience. In the end, it was the latter that prevailed. Restoration efforts begin in both countries. In Chino, California, mechanics recover a P-47 from a jungle crash site in New Guinea. It takes 7 years to rebuild. When the engine finally fires again, the hangar shakes. The old veterans and attendants men with white hair and trembling hands weep openly. In Japan, a group of aviation enthusiasts locates the wreckage of a Zero near Truck Lagoon. Piece by piece, they clean and polish it, refusing to replace the original scars. "We are not fixing history," says one volunteer. "We are remembering it." In 1978, an air show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, brings both aircraft together for the first time since the war. A restored Zero, painted in its original green livery, takes off beside a gleaming silver Thunderbolt. The crowd holds its breath. The engine's thunder, one a high-pitched snarl, the other a deep growl. They fly side by side, not as enemies, but as legends. The announcer's voice trembles. "Two philosophies, one sky." When they pass overhead, the air seems to shimmer as if history itself exhales. The legacy of the P-47 continues through its descendants. The lessons learned from its rugged design influenced the next generation of aircraft, the A-10 Thunderbolt that, too, designed 3 decades later, bears its name with pride. The A-10's armored cockpit and 30mm cannon are echoes of Kartvel's philosophy: protect the pilot, deliver overwhelming power, and never break under fire. Engineers at Fairchild Republic even keep a framed photograph of the original P-47 on their wall, captioned, "The first thunder still roars." In Japan, Horikoshi's legacy takes a quieter path. After the war, he becomes an advocate for peaceful aviation, helping design passenger planes and writing memoirs about his wartime experiences. In one passage, he reflects, "The Zero was my dream and my sorrow. It taught me that beauty without strength is fragile, and strength without soul is empty." His words echo the transformation of an entire generation, from faith in invincibility to humility before progress. Today, only a handful of true Zeros remain airworthy. Their thin frames glint under modern skies, fragile yet defiant. Pilots who fly them describe the same sensation their predecessors once did: the lightness, the perfect balance, the feeling that the aircraft anticipates every move. Across from them, in American air shows, the surviving Thunderbolts still thunder down the runway, shaking the earth with their power. When the two meet, spectators rise to their feet. The sight is no longer about victory or defeat, but remembrance. For historians, the story of the P-47 and the Zero is no longer a tale of one triumphing over the other. It is a lesson in adaptation and how innovation, driven by necessity, reshapes the world. The Zero showed what human imagination could achieve when freed from limits. The Thunderbolt showed what happens when that imagination is reinforced by industry and endurance. Together they mark the transition from the romantic age of flight to the age of machines that survive the unthinkable. As the documentary closes, imagine one final image: a Pacific airfield at sunset. A restored Zero stands beside a gleaming Thunderbolt. Their propellers slow to a halt. The light fades to gold across their metal skins, one smooth and delicate, the other rugged and scarred. Between them, silence stretches, filled not with rivalry, but respect. In war, machines reflect their makers. The Zero carried the soul of a nation that believed speed and spirit could conquer anything. The Thunderbolt carried the will of a people who refused to break. Together, they remind us victory is never born from perfection, but from endurance.